"You're not a cultural fit anymore. We need people who move faster." That's what the new CEO said. I just listened. My name is Mark Jensen. I'm 52 years old, and I spent nearly 2 decades as the chief systems architect at Corelytics. It started as a small company and grew into a benchmark in predictive intelligence for the financial sector. And I grew with it. From the very first blueprint of our core system, I was the one who designed the guts that still keep the product running. Then came Ryan Callister, the new CEO. Young, polished, full of confidence. He was brought in after Corelytics was acquired by Novus Capital, one of those holding firms that looks at businesses like spreadsheets, not people. He came in with buzzwords, reinvention, digital transformation, restructuring. The kind of hollow language that fills up long meetings and says very little. When we met for the first time, he shook my hand like he was ticking a box. Never asked what I did. Never sat down with me to understand the system that drives half of our revenue. They didn't know that system was mine. Literally. Registered. Patented. Forgotten by everyone except me. They thought the system belonged to the company. That letting someone go would be the end of the story. But now, let's see if they notice the absence before it all falls apart. The meeting was scheduled just 15 minutes in advance. Subject: Organizational Restructuring Update. I knew it wasn't a meeting. It was a ritual. And I was just playing my part. When I walked into the room, the stage was already set. Ryan on one side of the table, 2 HR reps on the other, and a gray folder sitting between them. No one looked me in the eye. Just protocol. "Mark, we're grateful for everything you've contributed over the years. But with the board's new strategic vision and the company's reorganization, we've decided to take a different direction." That's how the new CEO let go of the engineer who had kept the heart of the company beating for nearly 2 decades. He spoke in corporate code, words like alignment, efficiency, modernization. I heard him, but I wasn't really listening anymore. My eyes drifted to the glass wall behind him where I could still see my old office. The lights were already off. It hadn't come out of nowhere. It started weeks earlier when Novus Capital finalized its acquisition of Corelytics. The talk was all about growth, synergy, access to new markets. What followed was a systematic purge. The old technical leadership was gone. The CTO was replaced by a manager pulled from a fintech. Some project leads disappeared overnight. And me. I was just left behind. Gradually, I stopped getting invited to technical alignment meetings. Invitations just stopped arriving. Key projects were reassigned. The IT team, once made up of engineers I had personally trained, now reported to a newly hired operations manager who liked to talk loudly about full automation and decentralized DevOps, but couldn't explain a basic data flow if his job depended on it. My work was labeled legacy. Someone even asked me once if I still used manual scripts. I laughed to myself. They were running on frameworks I had coded myself. Lines of code holding up every transactional system in the company. Every analytics dashboard. Every risk forecast we sold to banks. I tried to speak up. I tried to explain, informally, that messing with the platform's core without understanding its dependencies was dangerous. Ryan listened, nodded with that smug expression and said, "Mark, we have to look forward. We can't be held hostage by systems only one person understands." That's when it clicked. I wasn't the solution anymore. I was the risk. They wanted to erase me, not because I didn't matter, but because I mattered too much. And so, despite having built the heart of the company, I became invisible. In the termination room, they handed me the exit package, a standard envelope with figures, confidentiality clauses, and a separation form. They said I had a week to clear out my desk, but if I preferred, I could leave that same day. I left. No goodbyes. There was no one left worth saying goodbye to. The building felt unfamiliar on the way out. The cold lights, the silent halls, the glowing screens showing dashboards I had helped build. I passed by 2 developers who barely knew who I was. They were still trying to figure out how the authorization flows worked. They wouldn't. Down in the parking garage, I sat in my car with the box on my lap. Among the few items I took, there was an old ID badge and a printed copy of the technical diagram for the first version of the predictive system. They thought they were firing a man. What they did was erase a position without checking who really owned the foundation of the entire business. And now? What happens when an entire company runs on something it no longer owns? I got home late in the afternoon. The sun hit the hood of the car like everything was normal. I parked, grabbed the box from the passenger seat and went inside. No sound, no messages, no calls. It was as if my departure from the company had been so complete. They erased my existence along with it. I set the box down on the kitchen table, stared at it for a few minutes. Inside were fragments of who I used to be. A 3D printed miniature of Corelytic's first server, made by an intern years ago. A keychain from a cybersecurity event I spoke at back in 2012. A photo of the old office team, all of us smiling in front of a whiteboard covered in crooked diagrams that looked more like abstract art than architecture. Half of them had already left. The other half probably didn't even remember who I was. I went upstairs to the office. Not the company's. Mine. That cramped room with overflowing shelves and 2 monitors that hadn't been turned on in days. I sat down in the chair. My arms sank into the worn leather armrests. I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes. I remembered the first contract. The day the former CEO called me into his office and said, "Mark, I want you to design the system from scratch. No recycled code. Build it like it's yours." And I did, in every sense of the word. I remembered the weekends I worked through the night while the scoring system kept freezing from bugs only I knew how to fix. The nights I slept on the office couch during fiscal year end because I couldn't risk letting the risk analysis system go down. I remembered missing my father-in-law's funeral because of a board meeting, a strategic alignment session that dragged on for 4 hours and ended with them approving exactly what I'd proposed on the first slide. I remembered my wife's birthday, the night I left in the middle of dinner to fix a server failure only I could trace. She laughed and said, "The company's your mistress." I replied, "It's just a phase." It wasn't. It was my whole life. I opened the bottom drawer of the cabinet. There they were, every document tied to the patent. The original, registered in my name, with the date, number, and intellectual property scope spelled out clearly. Multi-layer predictive algorithm applied to financial risk and sensitive transactions. Back then, I had suggested we register it under the company's name, but legal was tied up in another deal, and the paperwork stalled. They used my name as a placeholder. The placeholder became permanent, and then no one ever thought about it again. In the world of fast-growing startups, the gears that keep the machine running only become a problem when they stop turning. I closed the folder and left it on the table, rested my forehead against it, took a deep breath. I wasn't angry. Not yet. It was something else, a heavy silence. The kind of pain that doesn't scream, it just fills the room. The company moved on. The office was probably in another meeting by now. Ryan was likely presenting next steps to the board, maybe even highlighting promising numbers to investors, with the dashboards I built flashing across the big screen in the main room. Maybe there was applause, smiles, frothy lattes. On paper I was out, but under the hood, the system still bore my name, and maybe it was time to remind them of that. The next morning, I got up before the alarm, though I didn't need it anymore, made some coffee, sat down in my home office, and stared at the patent folder for a few minutes. Not out of doubt, out of weight, the kind of document that only becomes a weapon when it's ignored. I opened the file slowly, read every clause, checked every date. I reminded myself why I did it in the first place. Back then, the system was a strategic risk, too new, too fragile. I didn't want outsiders copying it, neither did the company. But as usual, no one on the board wanted to deal with the paperwork. They told me, just register it under your name for now. We'll transfer it later. That later never came. I called an old colleague, Patrick, an intellectual property attorney, one of the few guys who never pretended to be smarter than he was. He picked up on the second ring. "Mark? Been a while. Everything all right?" I explained the situation as plainly as I could. He went silent for a few seconds. "Are you telling me that Corelytics is currently running a system based on patented technology that's still registered in your name?" "Yes. And this system is part of their core product?" "It is the core product." Patrick let out a short breath. "Do you realize how big this is?" I did. Just not fully. He asked me to send over the documents, the dates, and the technical background. I sent everything that morning. Then I spent the rest of the day reviewing old files. architectures, data flows, documentation, diagrams no one ever updated because no one but me ever really understood how the system worked. That afternoon, Patrick called back. The patent is active, it's in your name, the coverage is broad, and more importantly, if they've made any modifications without your consent, it could be a direct violation. I stayed silent. Mark, if this ends up in court, the company will have to prove it doesn't rely on your technology. But the truth is, they probably have no idea what you're holding. He was right. The new CEO never asked any questions. The board just rubber-stamped the termination, another line in a restructuring spreadsheet. No technical meetings, no risk assessment. No one even checked the records before cutting me loose. The next day I read on Novus Capital's website that Coralytics was finalizing a deal with Bankwell, a mid-sized European financial institution. A big contract, long-term. The press release read, "Our proprietary predictive system will power Bankwell's new intelligent credit program." That system was mine. They were about to sign an international contract built on a foundation they didn't own. I closed the browser, went back to the folder. What I felt wasn't anger. It wasn't pride either. It was something else. Direction. That cold, focused clarity that only comes when you know exactly what needs to be done. I wasn't going to expose anyone. No scandal. I didn't want to destroy the company. I had spent half my life building it. They just didn't know yet. But in the next meeting, they wouldn't be the ones controlling the conversation. For a week I didn't speak to anyone. No friends, no former colleagues, not even family. The only person who knew everything was Patrick, my attorney, and now my bridge between the silence and whatever came next. In those first few days, I was patient. I gathered evidence, timelines, system versions, everything backed up redundantly as I always did. I built a detailed timeline, when the company was acquired, when the system changes began, which meetings I was excluded from, which platform versions were released after I was let go. I opened the terminal on my personal machine, found old logs, code structures, blueprints proving the product's core still ran on the architecture I had originally built. The signature was there, not just in the name, it was in the style, in the shortcuts, in the invisible logic no new product manager would ever be able to decipher. With every file added to the dossier, something inside me grew steadier, calmer. There was no doubt left. The company was dependent on something it did not legally own. And worse, they didn't even realize it. On Thursday, Patrick called. I spoke to a couple people in the industry. The Bankwell deal is being signed this coming Tuesday. They're positioning it as a turning point for their international expansion. And the system? I asked. It's at the center of the pitch. They're promising predictive risk analysis powered by the current core, meaning your tech. I took a deep breath. Patrick continued. I recommend we send the formal notice on the same day they sign the deal. Early, before the board meeting. If we play this right, they'll hit pause before making a legal mistake. Let's do it, I replied. I spent the weekend organizing the attachments. Technical dependency diagrams, system versions, code excerpts, screenshots of old emails, even internal reports documenting platform evolution, with my name on the alpha and beta releases. With each file, what I felt wasn't anger, it was clarity. The difference between revenge and justice lies in focus. On Monday, we finalized the wording of the notice. Direct, technical, undeniable. No threats, no dramatics. Just a professional statement alerting the company that it was operating with a still active, personally held patent, without any formal transfer or licensing agreement. In the footer, we included contact instructions for entering formal negotiations before proceeding with any commercial expansion involving the technology. Recipients, CEO, legal, product director, and CC'd quietly, a board member from Novus Capital whom I knew to be meticulous about regulatory risk. The email was scheduled to go out Tuesday morning, 7:58 a.m. The next day I woke up before the alarm. Black coffee, neutral clothes. No ceremony. I opened my laptop and watched the system clock. 7:57. I thought back to the last time I was in the company's office. The silence in the elevator. The feeling of being erased. 7:58. I clicked send, closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and waited. They had just found out that the system behind their next big move wasn't theirs. At 8:17 a.m., my phone vibrated for the first time. Unknown number. I didn't answer. At 8:23, an email came in. Subject: Urgent, notification received. Sent by Corelytic's legal department. They were requesting an immediate conversation to clarify the technical contents of the communication. At 8:34, Patrick forwarded me the response from Novus Capital's legal team. Curt, formal, but one sentence said it all. We are reviewing the matter internally with the highest priority. The silence was over. At 9 a.m., the meeting between the company and Bankwell was set to begin for the signing of a multi-million-dollar contract that would bring Corelytic's technology to Europe. It was the new CEO's big moment, the move that would justify his bonus and his seat at the table. At 9:11, Patrick received a call from one of the bank's lawyers. They wanted to confirm whether the notice was legitimate. He confirmed it, calmly, explained that the patent was registered, active, and directly tied to the system they were about to deploy. Our client is open to negotiation, he said, but the current operation does constitute a violation. At 9:29 a.m., the contract signing was postponed indefinitely. The bank demanded formal clarification. They requested a meeting with Novus Capital's board before resuming negotiations. The deal stalled. At 10:02, I got a direct call from Ryan. I didn't answer. At 10:17, another email, this time signed by him. Mark, we need to talk. Urgently. Can we meet at your office? They still thought I had an office. At 11:15, the phone rang again. This time I picked up. Mark Jensen? Asked a steady voice. Yes. This is Laura Bremer, legal counsel for Novus Capital. I'm calling on behalf of the board. We'd like to schedule a meeting as soon as possible to better understand the patent situation. Understand? We need to assess the scope of coverage, review the terms of your notice, and discuss possible resolutions. We're aware that you're no longer with the company, but your work is, quite clearly, more central than we were led to believe. I took a deep breath. I'm available tomorrow, as long as a technical advisor and a board member are present. Agreed. We'll send you the location. I hung up, leaned my head against the wall, and smiled. For the first time in days, it wasn't arrogance, it was relief. For the first time, someone above Ryan's pay grade acknowledged that the work he ignored, the work I was fired for standing by, was critical to the business. What the board was beginning to understand was that this wasn't just a management failure. It was a serious legal exposure. The company wasn't at risk because of unstable code, it was at risk because they had ignored the one basic question: who built the ground they were standing on? Late in the afternoon, I got one last message, from a personal number. It was Ryan. You've put us in a difficult position, but there's still time to resolve this smartly. Let me know if you're willing to talk directly with me. I didn't respond. They thought a phone call would fix it. But the truth was, I was now the one person they could no longer negotiate with on their terms. And this time, I'd be the one sitting at the table. The office was in a glass tower in the financial district. Quiet floors, polite receptionist, carpet that absorbed every sound. I was escorted to a conference room with a view of the city. 9 chairs, 2 already occupied. Laura Bremer, legal counsel for Novus Capital, stood by the table, organizing documents. Next to her was an older man in a light gray suit with a sharp, analytical look. Thomas Ingram, board member and head of risk and compliance for the holding company. He extended a firm handshake. Mr. Jensen, thank you for coming. Your work has our full attention. Before I could respond, the door opened. Ryan walked in. He hesitated when he saw me. The same performative confidence he used to strut through Corelytic's hallways was now visibly cracked. I sat. He sat. No one spoke for a few seconds. Laura began. We'd like to discuss a practical resolution. We acknowledge the validity of the patent and the company's use of the technology. Our goal is to reach an agreement that allows Corelytic to continue operations without legal risk. I'm not here to negotiate my dignity, I said without raising my voice. I'm here to set the terms under which I return to the business I helped build. Ryan cleared his throat, as if swallowing his own voice. Thomas simply crossed his arms. Go on, he said. I looked at each of them one by one. My terms are simple. A licensing contract for the system, in my name, with lifetime royalties proportional to the technology's use. Creation of a new role, Chief Technology Officer, CTO, with full technical autonomy and direct access to the board. The room froze for a moment. Laura broke the silence. Those terms are substantial. They're proportional, I replied. What you'd lose if the Bankwell deal collapses outweighs any symbolic value in maintaining internal appearances. Thomas leaned forward. Why keep Ryan in the company? Because I'm not here to settle a score. I'm here to show that discarded knowledge is expensive, but he can still learn if he wants to. Thomas nodded to Laura. Bring in legal. Let's draft the terms. I stood, picked up my folder. I don't need to stay. You have what you need. Call me when the contract is ready. As I walked down the hallway, I moved like someone who already knew the way. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the steel doors. For the first time since being let go, I didn't feel like a man trying to prove something. I already had. The company could keep running. The deal could still go through, but now, on my terms. I returned on a Tuesday. No temporary badge, no waiting room. The company's receptionist recognized me, stood up quickly, and made a call. Less than 2 minutes later, Stephen, one of the developers I had trained in the early days, came to escort me to the new office. And it was new. Different floor, spacious room, tinted glass, but full view of the open space below. On the door, a fresh nameplate, Chief Technology Officer, M. Jensen. I took a deep breath before walking in. Not out of emotion, out of readiness. The office was clean, functional, a folder on the desk with pending documents, a small welcome note from the board, no fanfare, no theater. The company now knew exactly who I was. At 10 a.m., sharp, the first meeting. Product team, legal, and Ryan, now listed as Chief Operating Officer. He walked in quietly, sat 2 seats to my right. Didn't make eye contact. I didn't force it. Time had taught me something. Real respect doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from consistency. I laid out the new directive. No critical changes would be made without documentation, cross-validation, and signed architectural review. It was basic, but the kind of basic that had been ignored until now. Now, it was company policy. Our work starts now, I concluded. We're rebuilding trust, internally and externally. No one questioned it. In the days that followed, I reviewed long-forgotten flows, updated logs, and picked up half-finished projects. There were good people here. They had just lacked real technical direction. I started spotting hidden talent, developers who had been underestimated, analysts stuck in operational roles. I gave them room. I gave them a voice. By the end of the first week, Bankwell resumed talks, under new documentation, with updated compliance clauses, and my name listed as the accountable party for the technology in use. The renegotiation meeting lasted 2 hours. The contract was signed 3 days later. The business moved forward, but now, on solid ground. One Friday, after reviewing reports late in the day, there was a knock at my door. Ryan. He asked if he could come in. I nodded. I just wanted to say thank you for keeping the company standing and for not destroying me. I looked at him. He looked thinner, more restrained. You can still do good work here, I said, but you'll need to learn to listen to the people who built something before you try to rebuild everything. He nodded silently and left. I stayed there another hour, alone in the office, looked out at the city through the window. My name was now on contracts. My terms were signed. My office was larger. My access complete. But now what? I had come back. I had won. I held the power. But was this really where I wanted to stay? A few days later, I got a discreet email from a Canadian startup in the tax intelligence space. We admire your work. We're building something new. Total autonomy. No egos. Just creation. Interested in a conversation? I closed the email without replying. Not yet. The question lingered, quiet but persistent. Coming back had been necessary, but staying, that was a choice. 6 months later, I sat in the same glass office, same desk, different system. The people, more attentive. The company's atmosphere had changed. Gradually. No speeches. The technical silence had been replaced by purposeful conversations. Meetings were no longer theater. They had become decisions with weight. For the first time, the board asked to follow the platform's evolution closely. They wanted to understand, not just approve. The new system, now in beta, was modular, scalable, and properly documented. Every new line of code required peer review. Every release was preceded by a technical review, no more PowerPoint shows. The mistakes of the past had become method. At the center of it all wasn't my title. It was my conviction. Knowledge isn't vanity. It's foundation. The Bankwell contract remained stable. Other companies had begun approaching Corelytics, now backed by a reputation strengthened through a real story of reconstruction. And in the market, rumors had begun to spread that the real engine behind the company was back, not as a savior, but as a quiet architect. At the last quarterly meeting, Thomas Ingram from the Novus board pulled me aside. "Mark, what you've done here, it's going to last, not because of the system, but because this time, technical culture has real leadership." I nodded in thanks. I'm not one for speeches. A few days later, I received another email from the Canadian startup. Same offer, same invitation, full autonomy, lean team, no politics. This time I replied, "Let's talk." The following Monday, I walked into the office and left an envelope on Ryan's desk. Inside was my transition letter, not a sudden resignation, a notice that the cycle was coming to a close, with time, with respect, with process. I created a succession plan, recommended Stephen as my technical successor, not out of loyalty, out of merit. The kid had grown into a quiet leader, focused. He listened before speaking. He corrected without needing a spotlight. My last official day was low-key, no party, just a firm handshake from every person on the team, a few quiet smiles, and a note left on my desk. "Thank you for not giving up on us when we gave up on you." On the way out, I walked the hallway where I had once been ignored, saw new faces, people who might never know everything that had happened there. And that was okay. I hadn't come back to prove anything. I came back to leave things the right way. Outside, the day was overcast, but light. I took the elevator down, walked out of the building, and headed to the cafe on the corner. Ordered the same coffee as always, sat by the window. I pulled out my phone and opened the email from the startup. Subject line, "Ready to start again?" I smiled. Sometimes starting over isn't about forgetting what came before. It's about calmly deciding that the next chapter will be yours from the beginning. And you? Would you have come back? Or let the system collapse on its own?